Every morning before sunrise, Clara Evans, a poor maid with blistered hands and a bruised spirit, secretly slipped leftover bread into a paper bag and crossed the quiet alley behind her cruel boss's mansion, just to feed a beggar no one else dared to look at. His beard was unkempt, his coat torn, and his eyes carried the silence of someone who had lost everything. Yet every time Clara knelt beside him, shielding him from the cold with her trembling hands, he'd whisper, "One day, kindness like yours will change everything." She never knew that the beggar she protected with her last crumbs was actually a billionaire hiding in plain sight. But when the beggar rose to his true power and fired her cruel boss in front of everyone, the world gasped, because what he did next shocked everyone. Why was a billionaire disguised as a beggar? And why did he protect the poor maid who once pitied him? The sun had not yet risen over Brookstone Estate, but the mansion already hummed with the soft clicks of heels and the clinking of silverware. Clara Evans moved like a shadow, swift, silent, and unseen. Her uniform hung loosely on her small frame, the faded fabric brushing her wrists as she carried a tray of breakfast up the marble staircase. She didn't look at the golden frames or crystal chandeliers anymore. Their beauty had long since turned bitter in her eyes. "Clara," the sharp voice of Mrs. Hartley cracked through the hallway like thunder. "Don't you dare spill another drop. This is imported coffee, not that slop you drink." "Yes, ma'am," Clara replied softly, lowering her eyes. The tray shook slightly in her hands. Behind her polite silence lived a woman who had endured too much, working from dawn to dusk to pay for her sick mother's medication and her little brother's school fees. Every insult from Mrs. Hartley, every extra chore without pay, she swallowed quietly, reminding herself it was only temporary. By 8 a.m., the mansion's breakfast was over, and so was Clara's patience. She slipped out through the servant's door, her heart pounding as she clutched a paper bag filled with the scraps she had saved. She crossed the back alley where garbage cans lined the wall, the air heavy with the scent of damp stone and rotting fruit. That's where she found him every morning, sitting beside the old fountain that hadn't flowed in years. The beggar. He looked up as she approached, his gray eyes tired but kind. "You're late today," he said with a faint smile. "I had to wait for Mrs. Hartley to finish shouting," Clara replied, handing him the bag. "It's not much. Some toast and a bit of jam." He accepted it with trembling hands. "You've got a good heart, Clara. How do you know my name?" she asked, surprised. "You told me once," he said, smiling faintly. "You were crying that day." Clara paused. She didn't remember. Maybe she had. Back when the weight of life had felt too heavy to hide. They sat in silence for a moment, the quiet wrapping around them like an invisible blanket. The beggar took slow bites as if savoring every crumb. Clara studied his face, how his eyes gleamed with something strange, something too sharp for a man living on the streets. But she brushed it off. Everyone had secrets. When the clock struck 9, Clara stood up. "I have to go back. If Mrs. Hartley finds out I left again, she'll dock my pay." "Then why do it?" the beggar asked softly. "Why keep feeding me when you can barely feed yourself?" Clara looked down, her voice trembling. "Because kindness shouldn't depend on wealth. If I stop helping, what's left of me?" He nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "You remind me of someone I once knew." That night, as Clara scrubbed the marble floors under the flicker of chandeliers, her mind kept returning to his words. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something off about him, something that didn't fit. 2 days later, her suspicion grew. A black car pulled up across the alley. 2 men in suits stepped out, whispering something to the beggar. She froze behind the window, watching as the beggar, her beggar, stood up straighter than she'd ever seen him. For a split second, he didn't look poor. He looked powerful. The next morning, he was gone. Clara searched the alley for 3 days, waiting by the fountain, even skipping lunch to stay longer. Nothing. Only the echo of his voice lingered in her head. "One day, kindness like yours will change everything." Then, on the 4th day, everything did change. That morning, the mansion was unusually tense. Mrs. Hartley's husband, Richard, had been pacing in his office since dawn, talking on the phone. Clara overheard words like meeting, board, and replacement. She tried to stay invisible, cleaning quietly as always. At noon, a convoy of black cars pulled into the driveway. Mrs. Hartley gasped. "What on earth?" The front door opened. Clara froze, her heart slamming against her ribs. It was him, the beggar. Only he wasn't wearing rags anymore. He was in a tailored suit, his beard trimmed, his posture regal. His gray eyes met hers across the room, steady and knowing. "Good afternoon," he said calmly. "I'm here to see Mr. Hartley." Richard Hartley stormed out, his tone arrogant. "Who are you?" "You can't just—" "I can," the man interrupted, his voice smooth yet commanding. "Because I now own this company." The room fell silent. Clara's tray slipped from her hands, crashing to the floor. The beggar turned to her gently, his eyes softening. "It's good to see you again, Clara." Mrs. Hartley looked between them, confused and furious. "You know this maid?" He smiled faintly. "She's the only reason I'm standing here today." Everyone stared, speechless. Clara's knees felt weak. Her world tilted. Who exactly was the man she had been feeding behind the mansion all this time? And what would happen now that the beggar she'd protected had returned as a billionaire, with power to destroy her cruel boss's world? The silence in the Hartleys' grand foyer stretched like glass, ready to shatter. Every servant froze, every whisper died, every eye locked on the man who once begged for scraps behind the mansion. Only now, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit and polished shoes, he radiated quiet power. Clara's heart thudded painfully in her chest. She could hardly breathe. The beggar she'd fed behind the alley was now standing before her boss, speaking like a man used to commanding rooms full of people. Richard Hartley blinked rapidly, his face reddening. "You own this company?" "That's impossible. I built this empire." The man smiled faintly, his expression calm but laced with something dangerous. "Correction, Mr. Hartley, you managed it poorly. I built it long before you took your position. You might remember the name Alexander Reed." The name struck the room like a thunderclap. Even Mrs. Hartley paled. "Alexander Reed? The billionaire who vanished after his company's merger scandal?" Alexander nodded slowly. "That's right." His gaze shifted briefly to Clara, and something soft flickered in his eyes. "But I didn't vanish. I walked away to see the world for what it really was, to understand the people running it, and the people suffering under them." Mrs. Hartley scoffed. "So you became a beggar?" "I became human," he replied, his voice cool. "And it led me here to your alley, to your maid." Gasps rippled through the servants. Clara wanted to disappear. Her hands trembled as she tried to steady herself, but Alexander turned toward her fully now, his words gentle, sincere. "When the world ignored me, when I had nothing, you fed me, not out of pity but out of kindness. And that kindness reminded me of who I truly was." Mrs. Hartley's expression twisted with disbelief. "You're saying a maid inspired a billionaire?" Alexander's eyes hardened. "I'm saying her heart did what your wealth never could." The room went deathly still. Clara's lips parted, but no words came. She felt the heat rise to her cheeks, shame and awe tangling inside her. I didn't know who you were," she whispered. "I know," he said softly. "That's what made it real." Richard Hartley's voice rose, sharp and defensive. "You can't just walk in here and take everything. You disappeared for years. This company is mine now." Alexander's calm broke for the first time. He stepped forward, eyes blazing. "Your greed turned my company into a graveyard for honest workers. You exploited them, silenced complaints, and destroyed lives for profit. You're finished." He turned to his assistant, one of the men from the black car. "Effective immediately, Richard Hartley and his wife are relieved of all positions and privileges." "Security will escort them out," Mrs. Hartley shrieked. "You can't do this." "I just did," Alexander replied coldly. As the guards moved in, Clara instinctively stepped back. She didn't know what to feel. Part of her wanted to cheer, but another part ached with disbelief. Mrs. Hartley's glare found her like a blade. "This is your fault, isn't it?" "You filthy little snake!" Clara flinched, but Alexander stepped between them instantly. "If you ever speak to her again like that," he said, voice low, "I'll make sure you regret it." Mrs. Hartley's eyes widened, and for the first time, she fell silent. Minutes later, the Hartleys were gone. Their echoes faded down the marble hallway, leaving behind only servants still trying to process what had happened. Clara stood frozen near the wall, her mind spinning. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You were a billionaire. All along?" Alexander approached her slowly, his presence suddenly too large for the quiet mansion. "I was," he said. "But I lost myself chasing wealth. I wanted to know if there was still kindness left in this world or if it was something money could buy. And? She asked softly. He smiled faintly. I found you. Clara's breath caught. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of the things neither could say. Gratitude, confusion, a strange, trembling warmth that frightened her more than the Hartleys ever had. I don't deserve any of this, Clara murmured. I just did what anyone would. Alexander shook his head. No, most people looked through me. You didn't. You saw a man, not a beggar. That's something even billions can't buy. He turned away for a moment, his gaze drifting across the mansion's lavish interior. I'm giving this estate back to its workers. The people who are mistreated will be compensated. But as for you, Clara, she blinked uneasy. What about me? He looked back at her, eyes warm but steady. You'll have a choice. You can stay here and manage the household under my care, or you can walk away with enough to start over anywhere you want. Clara hesitated. The offer sounded like freedom, yet it terrified her. Why me? Alexander's lips curved slightly. Because the poor maid who protected a beggar deserves a life where no one ever looks down on her again. Her throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but words failed. She just nodded, her eyes glistening. Later that evening, as the mansion emptied, Clara sat alone in the quiet dining hall. The chandeliers glowed dimly above, their light reflecting off the silverware. The same room where she'd once been scolded now felt like another world. Through the tall windows she saw Alexander standing in the courtyard, talking with his assistants. The way he carried himself, the authority in his gestures was unmistakable. Yet when he turned and noticed her watching, he smiled in that same humble way she'd known in the alley, and that's when it struck her. The man she'd pitied had never truly needed saving. But somehow, she had saved him anyway. Still, one question refused to leave her mind. Whispering in the back of her thoughts, why had he hidden as a beggar in the first place? And what secret pain was powerful enough to make a billionaire choose to live like the poor? The night wind swept softly through the garden of Brookstone Estate. The fountain, dry for years, now flowed again, a quiet symbol of change. Clara stood by the window, watching the water ripple under the moonlight. Yet peace was the last thing she felt. Her mind churned with questions, most of them circling around one man. Alexander. Read the billionaire who lived like a beggar. The beggar who'd fed on scraps she gave him every morning. And the man whose eyes now followed her as though he'd known her all his life. When she turned, she found him standing in the doorway. The light caught the faint scar on his jaw, the only reminder of a rougher life. He looked different now, clean-shaven, powerful. But when he smiled, it was the same gentle warmth she remembered. You should be resting, he said softly. I can't, Clara admitted. There's too much I don't understand. Alexander stepped closer, his voice low. Then ask, she hesitated. Why? Why would a billionaire pretend to be a beggar? What could possibly make you do that? He looked past her, toward the moonlit fountain, and for a long time he didn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, fragile even, because I forgot what it felt like to be human. Clara's brow furrowed. What do you mean? He exhaled deeply, his eyes darkening. 5 years ago I lost my wife, Emily. She was everything I wasn't, kind, selfless, grounded. She believed wealth meant nothing if it couldn't help people. I was too busy building my empire to listen. And then she was gone. A car accident. My driver was drunk. I was in another country signing a deal. Clara's heart clenched. I'm so sorry. Alexander gave a hollow smile. Don't be. I killed her long before the crash when I chose ambition over love. After the funeral, I couldn't stand my own reflection. The mansions, the cars, the private jets, they all looked like monuments to a man I no longer wanted to be. He paused, eyes glistening under the soft light. So I left. Gave my board control. Disappeared. I wanted to know what it meant to have nothing, to see if there was still compassion left in the world. Clara's voice trembled. And you found me. He nodded slowly. You gave me food. But more than that, you gave me something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. You never asked for anything in return. You looked at me like a person, not a broken story. Tears filled Clara's eyes. I just thought you were lonely. I was, he admitted, but not in the way you think. For a moment silence hung heavy between them. Then Alexander walked to the fountain, his hands in his pockets. Do you know what I realized while living on the streets? The world moves fast, too fast to notice those who fall behind. You were one of the few who stopped to look. Clara moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. You don't have to punish yourself forever, Alexander. He looked at her, his gaze steady. Maybe not. But I had to understand the value of what I'd lost before I could rebuild anything. He studied her face then, his tone softening. When I saw you that first morning, I thought you were like the rest, someone who'd turn away. But when you shared your food, something shifted. For the first time, I wanted to live again. Her chest tightened. I never thought a small act could matter that much. It mattered more than you'll ever know, he said. Because it saved me. A quiet moment passed. The night air felt charged, full of unspoken emotions. Then softly, Clara said, You keep saying I saved you. But maybe you were meant to save me too. He frowned gently. What do you mean? She turned away, blinking back tears. You saw how they treated me here. I thought I'd be stuck in that cycle forever, scrubbing floors, holding my breath every time someone yelled. But today, when you walked in and faced them, it was like watching justice come alive. Alexander's expression softened. Then maybe we saved each other. Clara smiled faintly, wiping a tear. Maybe. But as they stood there, the silence between them shifted again, deeper, heavier. A quiet tension neither dared to name. Alexander finally spoke, his voice low. Clara, I want to show you something tomorrow. Something no one else has seen. What is it? She asked. He hesitated. A place that explains everything I am, and everything I'm trying to fix. She nodded slowly. Then I'll come. As he turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of something vulnerable in his eyes. Fear. It wasn't fear of rejection, but of being seen too deeply. After he left, Clara sat by the window, her heart heavy and full all at once. The night whispered around her, carrying questions she couldn't answer. Why did it feel like his story wasn't over? And why did she sense that whatever he was about to show her tomorrow would change both their lives forever? Outside, the fountain gurgled softly in the dark. But beneath that peaceful sound, something else was stirring, a secret long buried, waiting to surface. Because in truth, Alexander's return wasn't just about gratitude, it was about redemption. And the next dawn would reveal whether redemption could heal what guilt had once destroyed, or if some wounds were meant to bleed forever. Morning light filtered through the tall glass windows of Brookstone Estate, painting the marble floors in gold. The world outside was quiet, but inside Clara's chest her heart raced with unease. Alexander had asked her to meet him at the edge of town, a place he called the beginning of everything. She arrived at dawn, the air crisp with dew. A black car waited by an old iron gate. Alexander stood beside it, his suit jacket hanging loosely, his tie undone. He didn't look like the billionaire everyone now whispered about. He looked like the man she'd once found shivering in an alley. Haunted, humble, human. Ready? He asked. Clara nodded. Where are we going? He gave a faint smile. Home. The drive was long and silent, winding through narrow roads that eventually opened onto a vast, forgotten property. The gate creaked open, revealing a weathered orphanage hidden among overgrown trees. The paint had peeled away, the playground rusted with time. This place, Clara murmured. What is it? Alexander stepped out and looked at the building like he was facing a ghost. Where I grew up, he said quietly. Before the money. Before the name Reed meant anything. Clara's eyes widened. You were raised here? He nodded. I was one of the orphans nobody wanted. Emily, my wife, used to volunteer here when we were young. It's where we met. We used to dream of rebuilding this place one day. Clara's gaze softened. But you left? I left because I thought money could fix everything. His voice broke slightly. I built skyscrapers, companies, fortunes, but I forgot this place. After Emily's death, I came back once. The roof was falling apart, the children gone. It felt like my soul was collapsing with it. He turned toward her, his expression pained. That's when I decided to disappear, to strip everything away. I wanted to feel helpless again, to remember what it meant to be one of them. Clara's throat tightened. So becoming a beggar wasn't about hiding. It was about punishing yourself. He nodded slowly. I thought if I suffered enough, I'd find forgiveness. But it wasn't until you showed up, handing me bread and warmth, that I realized guilt doesn't heal by hurting yourself. It heals when someone shows you you're still worth saving. Clara blinked back tears. You were already worth saving, Alexander. He smiled faintly. Maybe, but I needed someone to remind me. He pushed open the orphanage door. Dust floated through the air, sunlight cutting across broken wooden floors. In the corner, an old piano sat under a sheet. Alexander walked to it, lifted the cover, and pressed one key. It rang hollow but soft. I used to play this with Emily, he said, his voice a whisper. She said music could make even broken hearts feel less alone. Clara moved closer. You can rebuild this place again. Give it back to the children who need it. That's why I brought you here, he said, turning to her. I want you to run it, Clara froze. Me? You understand struggle, compassion, and humility, qualities this world has forgotten? This orphanage needs someone like you, she shook her head. Alexander, I don't have the experience, the education. He stepped forward, eyes steady. You have something better. Heart. The words hit her like a promise. I'll provide the funds, he continued. But you'll be the heart of this project. This place deserves a new name, and a new beginning. Clara's eyes filled. Why are you doing this for me? He smiled gently. Because the poor maid who protected a beggar deserves to see what her kindness built. The weight of his sincerity broke through her walls. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I don't know what to say. Say yes, he whispered. She did. Over the next few weeks, the orphanage transformed. Builders restored the roof, painted the walls, and filled the halls with laughter again. Clara moved through it all like someone living in a dream. The children adored her, and Alexander visited often, quietly standing in the background, watching her bring life back to his past. But amid the joy, a shadow lingered in his eyes. One evening, Clara found him alone in the courtyard, staring at a photo of Emily he carried in his pocket. You still miss her? Clara said softly. I always will, he admitted. But for the first time, missing her doesn't hurt. It reminds me to live. She smiled sadly. She'd be proud of you. He turned to her, eyes warm. She'd be proud of us. The sunset bathed the courtyard in gold. Alexander reached into his coat and handed her an envelope. Inside was a deed. Her name, Clara Evans, was written in elegant ink. She looked up in shock. It's yours, he said quietly. The orphanage, the foundation, everything tied to it. Her voice broke. Alexander, I can't. You can, he interrupted gently. You once gave me bread when you had nothing. Now I'm giving you a legacy built on that same kindness. You taught me that wealth means nothing if it doesn't lift someone else. Tears blurred her vision. You changed my life, he smiled faintly. You changed mine first. They stood there in silence, the golden light wrapping around them. For the first time in years, Alexander looked at peace. The beggar had become a billionaire again. But in truth, he'd become something far greater. As evening deepened, the laughter of children echoed through the halls of the newly named Emily Grace home. Clara watched them play. Her heart full, Alexander turned to leave, his silhouette framed against the fading sun. Where will you go now? She asked. He smiled. Wherever I'm needed next. The world is full of broken places, Clara, and now I know how to rebuild them. She stepped forward, tears shining in her eyes. Don't forget to come back. He looked at her for a long moment, his gaze tender. I couldn't, even if I tried. As his car disappeared down the winding road, Clara stood in the doorway of the orphanage, feeling both the ache of goodbye and the warmth of a new beginning. The poor maid had once protected a beggar, unaware he was a billionaire, but in the end, the beggar had protected her too, by giving her something greater than riches, a purpose, a legacy, and a love that would live on quietly, like a prayer whispered into the wind, forever remembered in the hearts of those who believed that kindness, no matter how small, could change the world.